The luxury restaurant was quiet, filled with rich men in expensive suits. Minjun, a mean billionaire, stood in the middle of the room. He looked at Yoona, a waitress, with a nasty smile. He didn't treat her like a person. He treated her like she was nothing. Suddenly, he threw a pile of $100 bills at her feet. "Your husband is a nobody," he laughed. "He is just a poor driver. Pick up this money, quit your job, and come with me if you want to see what a real king looks like." Yoona did not move. She didn't look at the money, and she wasn't scared. She stood up straight and kept her eyes on the elevator behind the billionaire. She knew a secret. Her nobody husband was actually the most powerful and dangerous man in the country. She wasn't being quiet because she was afraid. She was being quiet because she knew that when those elevator doors opened, Minjun's world would be destroyed. She wasn't waiting to be saved. She was waiting to watch the billionaire lose everything. Then, the elevator made a soft ding sound. A man named Jinwoo stepped out. He wore a simple, old jacket and kept his hands in his pockets. He looked only at the red mark on Yoona's face where she had been hurt. Minjun started to laugh, ready to make fun of the poor man who had come to pick up his wife. But suddenly, the billionaire's own bodyguards, tough men trained to fight, did not move to stop Jinwoo. Instead, they stood at attention and bowed very low. "Chairman," they whispered, sounding terrified. In that second, the billionaire realized his mistake. He hadn't just insulted a waitress. He had started a fight with a god of death, and now there was no way to escape. Jinwoo walked calmly across the room, ignoring the shocked faces and the billionaire's trembling hands. He didn't look at the money on the floor. He only looked at Yoona. He reached out and gently took her hand. His touch was warm and steady, a complete contrast to the chaos he had just caused by simply walking through the door. "Are you ready to go home?" Jinwoo asked. His voice was soft and kind, as if they were the only two people in the entire restaurant. Yoona looked at him, then at the guards who were still bowing so low they looked like they were frozen in place. She looked at Minjun, whose face had turned from a bright red of anger to a ghostly white of fear. She nodded slowly, and together, they walked toward the exit. No one tried to stop them. The crowd parted like water, and the billionaire stood silent, his mouth hanging open as his power vanished in the presence of a man in an old jacket. Once they were outside in the cool night air, Jinwoo led her to his modest car parked at the curb. He opened the door for her, making sure she was comfortable before he got behind the wheel. The drive was quiet for a few minutes. The city lights blurred past the windows, but Yoona's mind was racing. "Jinwoo," she said finally, her voice small. "Those men. Your billionaire boss's own security guards. Why did they bow to you? Why did they call you chairman?" Jinwoo kept his eyes on the road. He gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, but his face remained calm. He had spent 3 years building this peaceful life, and he wasn't ready to let the shadows back in just yet. "Who that?" Jinwoo said with a small, awkward laugh. "I told you I did my military service years ago, Yoona. Those guys. They were in my unit. I was their sergeant. I guess they still remember the old days. They always were a bit too dramatic." Yoona looked at his side profile. They looked terrified, Jinwoo. They didn't look like they were greeting an old friend. They looked like they were meeting a king. Jinwoo reached over and patted her hand. "You know how it is in the service. The bond is strong. And as for chairman, it was just a nickname we had back then because I was always the one organizing the chores and the schedules. They're just showing respect to an old leader. Don't let it worry you." Yoona wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that her husband was just a simple man with a few loyal friends. But as she looked at the red mark on her cheek in the car's mirror, she remembered the way the air in the room had changed when he walked in. It didn't feel like a reunion between soldiers. It felt like a warning to the world. "Minjun won't let this go," she whispered. "He is a powerful man." Jinwoo's eyes darkened for a split second, a flash of something cold and sharp appearing in his gaze before he blinked it away. "Let me worry about Minjun," he said softly. "To me, He's just another man who doesn't know how to behave. You're safe now. That's all that matters. As they pulled into their small driveway, Jinwoo smiled at her, the perfect image of a loving husband. But as he turned off the engine, he glanced at his phone. A message had arrived from a number with no name. It had only 4 words. The tiger is found. Jinwoo deleted the message and stepped out of the car, ready to play the nobody for just a little while longer. The next morning, Yoona walked into the Skyline Lounge to start her shift. She felt a heavy weight in her chest. She couldn't stop thinking about the billionaire's angry face or the way the guards had bowed to her husband. As soon as she entered the locker room, she noticed the other waitresses were whispering and looking at their phones. The manager, a man who usually liked Yoona, walked up to her with a sad look on his face. "I'm so sorry, Yoona," he whispered. "You have to leave. Now." "What? Why?" Yoona asked, her heart sinking. "Minjun," the manager explained. "He didn't just want you gone. He was so angry about last night that he bought the entire restaurant this morning. He called me 10 minutes ago. His first order was to fire you and blackball you from every restaurant in the city. He wants to make sure you never work again." Yoona felt a cold chill. She knew Minjun was powerful, but she didn't realize he would go this far just to hurt her. She slowly took off her apron and put it in her locker. She felt small and defeated. Outside, Minjun was waiting in his expensive car. When he saw Yoona walk out of the building with her head down, he rolled down his window and laughed. "I told you, didn't I? Without money, you are nothing. Now go back to your nobody husband and tell him you're unemployed. Maybe he can find you a job washing cars." Yoona didn't say a word. She walked to the corner and called Jinwoo. Her voice trembled as she told him what happened. "He bought the place just to hurt me, Jinwoo. I don't have a job anymore." On the other end of the line, Jinwoo's voice was as cold as ice. "Stay right there, Yoona. Don't move. Everything is going to be fine." As soon as he hung up, Jinwoo's face changed. The kind husband was gone. He dialed a secret number that he hadn't used in years. A man answered on the first ring, his voice shaking with respect. "Chairman? Is it really you?" "The Skyline Lounge," Jinwoo said, his voice low and dangerous. "A man named Minjun thinks he bought it this morning. I want the deed. I want the land. I want the air above it and the dirt beneath it. I want it in my wife's name in 5 minutes. Do it now." Back at the restaurant, Minjun was walking toward the front door, ready to tell the rest of the staff how powerful he was. Suddenly, his phone rang. It was his lawyer. "Sir, there's a problem," the lawyer screamed. "The bank just cancelled your purchase of the Skyline Lounge. Actually, they've seized the property. A global holding group just bought the building, the restaurant, and the entire block for 10 times the market value. They've already transferred the deed." "What? Who bought it?" Minjun yelled, stopping in his tracks. "The name on the paperwork. It's Yoona," the lawyer stammered. "Sir, she doesn't just work there anymore. She owns the building. And she's just signed an order to have you banned for life." Minjun looked up and saw a black car pull up. Jinwoo stepped out, looking calm as ever. He walked over to Yoona and handed her a simple gold key. "You're late for your shift, boss," Jinwoo said with a small smile. "But since you own the place, I don't think anyone will mind." Minjun stood on the sidewalk, his mouth open in shock. He was the billionaire, but in a single phone call, the nobody had turned him into a trespasser. Minjun was shaking with rage. He had lost his money, his pride, and his new restaurant all in one morning. He sat in his dark office and slammed his fist on the desk. He didn't care about the law anymore. He wanted Yoona and her husband to feel pain. He picked up his phone and called a group of dangerous men, debt collectors who used iron bars instead of words. "Go to this address," Minjun hissed, giving them the location of Yoona's humble family home. "Break everything. Make them crawl. I want them to beg for mercy." An hour later, 2 large black vans pulled up in front of the small house. 6 men stepped out. They were covered in tattoos and carried heavy wooden bats. They looked like monsters. The neighbors quickly shut their windows and locked their doors. The leader of the group, a man with a deep scar on his neck, kicked the front gate open. "Come out, little driver," the scar-faced man yelled. "We're here to collect a debt you can't pay." The front door of the house opened slowly. Jinwoo stepped out onto the porch. He wasn't wearing his jacket today. He was just in a plain black t-shirt. He looked very calm, as if he were just waiting for the mail. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't even look scared. The thugs started to laugh. They walked closer, swinging their bats. But as they got within a few feet of the porch, the sunlight hit Jinwoo's face. The leader with the scar stopped suddenly. His face went from mean to completely terrified in a second. He dropped his bat, and it hit the ground with a loud thud. "Boss," the leader whispered, his voice cracking. The other thugs stopped too. They looked at Jinwoo, then at each other. They began to tremble. They recognized the cold, sharp look in those eyes. This wasn't a driver. This was the man who had built the very world they worked in. This was the Black Dragon, who had disappeared years ago. "Scar," Jinwoo said softly. His voice was low, but it sounded like thunder to the men standing there. "I thought I told you to get out of the city 3 years ago. Why are you standing in my front yard?" The leader fell to his knees. The other 5 men followed him instantly, hitting the dirt and bowing their heads until they touched the grass. "We didn't know, master," the leader cried, his forehead pressed against the ground. "A man named Minjun paid us. He told us a nobody lived here. If we knew it was you, we would have cut off our own hands before coming near this house." Jinwoo walked down the porch steps. The thugs didn't dare to move or even breathe loudly. "Go back to Minjun," Jinwoo commanded. "Tell him the debt is settled. And tell him that if he sends anyone else to this house, I won't be so quiet next time. Do you understand?" "Yes, master." "Thank you, master," the men shouted. They scrambled to their feet, ran back to their vans, and drove away so fast they left tire marks on the road. Yoona walked out of the house a moment later, holding 2 glasses of water. She looked at the empty street and the wooden bat lying in the grass. "Jinwoo? I thought I heard someone shouting. Who was that?" Jinwoo picked up the bat and tossed it into the trash can with a smile. "Just some guys looking for directions, honey. They were a bit lost, but I pointed them in the right direction." Yoona's younger brother, Tae, was always a little too trusting. That evening, he sat in a dark, smoke-filled basement far from the bright lights of the city. He thought he was just playing a friendly game of cards with new friends, but he didn't realize they were working for Minjun. By the time the sun began to set, the men at the table leaned back with cold smiles. They pushed a piece of paper toward him. It said he owed them $500,000. "I don't have this much money," Tae cried, his face turning pale. "You cheated. The paper says you owe it," a large man with a golden tooth growled. "If you can't pay, we'll have to visit your sister and her nobody husband. I hear they just got a nice new restaurant. Maybe we'll take that instead." Tae was terrified. He couldn't tell Yoona. He knew she worked too hard already, and he didn't want to bring trouble to her door. But he didn't have to say a word. In the shadows of the city, Jinwoo's ears were everywhere. He already knew about the debt, before the ink on the paper was even dry. Jinwoo told Yoona he was going out to get some milk, but instead, he drove to the roughest part of town. He stopped in front of a building with no sign and a heavy steel door. A guard stood outside, looking for trouble. When he saw Jinwoo's simple jacket, he started to laugh. "Keep moving, old man. This place is for winners only." Jinwoo didn't say a word. He simply looked the guard in the eye. The guard's laughter died instantly. He felt a chill run down his spine, a feeling of pure danger he couldn't explain. He stepped aside and opened the door without being asked. Inside, the room was filled with the sound of clinking chips and angry whispers. Jinwoo walked straight to the back room, where the high-stakes games happened. The men inside were busy laughing at Tae, who was shaking in his chair. "I hear there's a debt to settle," Jinwoo said as he walked in. His voice was quiet, but it made everyone in the room stop talking. The man with the golden tooth looked up. "And who are you?" "The kid's father." "I'm the man who is going to give you a choice," Jinwoo said. He walked to the table and picked up the paper Tae had signed. He ripped it in half as if it were a cheap napkin. "Choice 1, you forget this name and this debt, and you move your business out of this neighborhood tonight." The golden-toothed man stood up, reaching for a knife. "And choice 2. Jinwoo leaned down, his face inches from the thugs. The lights overhead seemed to flicker. "Choice 2 is that I stop being polite. And if that happens, none of you will ever walk into a room again. You'll be carried." The thug looked into Jinwoo's eyes and saw a darkness so deep it felt like looking into a grave. He recognized that look. It was the look of the Black Dragon. The knife slipped from his fingers and hit the floor. The debt is gone," the thug stammered, his voice trembling. "We were just joking. Please, take the boy and go." Jinwoo grabbed Tae by the shoulder and led him out. Tae was crying with relief. "Jinwoo, how did you do that? Why were they so scared?" Jinwoo smiled and put his arm around the boy. "I just told them I'm a very good driver, Tae. And I promised to drive them somewhere they wouldn't like if they didn't play fair. Now, let's go home. And don't tell your sister. She worries too much about milk." Late that night, the house was quiet and warm. Jinwoo had fallen asleep early on the sofa, still wearing his black t-shirt. Yoona sat nearby, watching him. She felt lucky to have such a kind husband, but the events of the last few days kept spinning in her head. The bowing guards, the terrified thugs, and the way he had saved her brother, it all felt like a puzzle with missing pieces. As she reached over to place a blanket on him, she noticed that his shirt had pulled up a little. On the skin of his lower back, she saw a flash of dark ink. Her heart skipped a beat. Jinwoo always showered in private or with the lights off, and he never took his shirt off at the beach. She had never seen a tattoo on him in all 3 years of their marriage. Curiosity took over. She gently moved the fabric of his shirt just an inch higher. There, stretching across his spine, was the tail of a dragon. It was beautifully drawn in deep black ink, looking fierce and ancient. As she moved the shirt more, the full mark appeared. It was a massive, coiled dragon with sharp claws and glowing red eyes. It didn't look like a normal tattoo. It looked like a symbol of power and danger. Yoona gasped, her hand trembling. She remembered stories she had heard about the Black Dragon, the most powerful mafia leader who had disappeared years ago. People said he carried the mark of a dragon on his back to show he was the king of the underworld. Suddenly, Jinwoo's eyes snapped open. He wasn't groggy like someone who had just woken up. He was instantly alert. He felt the cold air on his back and realized what had happened. He sat up quickly and pulled his shirt down, his face turning pale. "Yoona," he whispered, his voice shaky. "It's not what it looks like." "You have a dragon on your back, Jinwoo," Yoona said, her voice filled with confusion and a little bit of fear. "A very big one. Why did you never tell me? You said you were just a regular soldier. Regular soldiers don't have marks like that." Jinwoo stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark street. He looked tired, as if the weight of his secret was finally too heavy to carry. "I told you I did things in the past I'm not proud of. That tattoo, it belongs to a man who doesn't exist anymore. I promised myself I would never let you see that side of me." "Who are you really?" Yoona asked, stepping closer to him. "The guards called you chairman. The thugs called you master. And now I see this. Are you really just a driver, or have you been lying to me since the day we met?" Jinwoo turned around. His eyes were soft and filled with love, but there was a sadness in them that broke her heart. "To the world I might be many things," he said softly. "But to you, I have only ever wanted to be the man who loves you. Please, Yoona." Don't look for the dragon. Just look at me. Yoona looked at her husband, the man who made her tea every morning. She wanted to believe him, but for the first time, she felt like she was living with a stranger. The questions were only beginning, and the peace they had worked so hard for was starting to crack. The tension at home was still thick, but a golden invitation arrived that changed everything. Minjun, the billionaire, was hosting a grand charity gala at the most expensive hotel in the city. He sent a special card to Yoona and Jinwoo. On the back, he had scribbled a nasty note. Come see how the top 1% lives. Dress your husband in something clean for once. Yoona didn't want to go, but Jinwoo insisted. We should show him that we aren't afraid, he said with a calm smile. He bought Yoona a beautiful, simple white dress, but for himself, he wore his usual modest black suit. He still looked like a regular driver, and that was exactly what Minjun wanted. When they arrived at the hotel, the room was filled with gold, diamonds, and cameras. Minjun was standing on a stage, holding a glass of champagne. When he saw Yoona and Jinwoo enter, he pointed at them and began to speak into the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, Minjun laughed, his voice echoing through the hall. I want to introduce some very special guests. This is the waitress who thinks she can own my restaurant, and her nobody husband. I invited them here so they could see what real power looks like. Maybe we can take up a collection to buy them a better car. The rich guests began to giggle and whisper. Yoona felt her face turn red. She reached for Jinwoo's hand, expecting him to look embarrassed. But Jinwoo wasn't looking at the floor. He was looking at the back of the room. Suddenly, the music stopped. The heavy double doors at the entrance swung open. A line of the most powerful business leaders and city officials walked in. They didn't stop to talk to Minjun. They didn't even look at the billionaire. They walked straight toward the middle of the room where Jinwoo was standing. The mayor of the city was at the front. He stopped before Jinwoo and bowed deeply. Then, the chairman of the National Bank did the same. We are so sorry for the delay, sir, the mayor said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. The city's charity foundation cannot begin without our guest of honor. We have been waiting for your permission to start the auction. The room went silent. Minjun's glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the stage. Guest of honor, he stammered. He's just a driver. I pay more for my shoes than he makes in a year. The mayor turned and looked at Minjun with disgust. You fool. This man doesn't just drive cars. He owns the companies that build them. He is the primary donor for every hospital in this district. He is the only reason this hotel still has a license to operate. Jinwoo stepped forward, and the crowd parted like a sea of silk and suits. He didn't look like a driver anymore. He looked like the king he had always been. He walked up to the stage and looked Minjun in the eye. You wanted to show me what real power looks like, Minjun, Jinwoo said quietly. But power isn't about the watch on your wrist or the microphone in your hand. It's about who stands up when you walk into the room. Jinwoo turned to the mayor. Cancel the billionaire's table. He doesn't belong here. As security guards, the same ones who had saluted Jinwoo before, escorted a screaming Minjun out of the building. Jinwoo turned back to Yoona. The billionaire was gone, but the mystery was only growing. Yoona realized that the nobody she married was the most important person in the room. The gala continued with soft music and the clinking of glasses, but the air felt different now. Even though Minjun had been kicked out, Jinwoo knew that a man with that much ego wouldn't go away quietly. As the guests moved toward the balcony to watch the fireworks, Jinwoo noticed 3 men in waiter uniforms who didn't quite fit in. They didn't look at the drinks they were carrying, they looked at the exits, and they looked at Jinwoo with cold, murderous eyes. Jinwoo, I think I left my purse at the table, Yoona said, looking around. The excitement of the night had made her a bit forgetful. Don't worry, honey, Jinwoo said, his voice as calm as a lake. You go ahead and watch the fireworks. I'll go back and find it for you. It'll only take a minute. He watched her walk toward the balcony, her white dress glowing in the moonlight. As soon as she was out of sight, The smile left Jinwoo's face. He turned around, and the three waiters immediately began to move toward him. They reached into their jackets, pulling out sharp, silenced weapons. Jinwoo didn't run. He didn't even look hurried. He stepped into a dark side hallway where the shadows were deep. The three men followed him, thinking they had trapped a driver in a dead end. But they were wrong. They hadn't trapped a driver. They had walked into the lair of the Black Dragon. In the darkness, Jinwoo moved like a ghost. There was no loud fighting, only the sound of a few quick thuds. The first man didn't even see Jinwoo move before he was unconscious on the floor. The second man tried to strike, but Jinwoo caught his arm with the strength of a steel trap. With one swift movement, the man was down. The third man turned to run, but Jinwoo was already behind him. Minjun sends his regards, I assume? Jinwoo whispered into the man's ear. The assassin couldn't even answer before everything went black. Jinwoo adjusted his tie and smoothed his black suit. He stepped back into the light of the main hall just as a soft pop sounded from outside. The first firework had hit the sky. He walked back to the table, picked up Yoona's small gold purse, and headed for the balcony. He found Yoona leaning against the railing, looking up at the beautiful colors of red and blue in the sky. She looked so peaceful, completely unaware that three men had just tried to kill her husband only 20 feet away. Found it, Jinwoo said, handing her the purse. Yoona smiled and took it. You're so fast, Jinwoo. I didn't even miss you. Did you see anything interesting in the hallway? Jinwoo looked out at the city lights, his eyes reflecting the fire in the sky. Nothing much, he said softly. Just a few people who had a bit too much to drink and needed to take a long nap. Yoona leaned her head on his shoulder. She still had so many questions about the dragon on his back and the way the mayor bowed to him, but in this moment, she felt safe. She didn't see the small drop of blood on Jinwoo's cuff, and he made sure to keep that hand hidden in his pocket. The silent war had started, but as long as he was standing, the shadows would never touch her. A few days later, the calm was shattered. Minjun had lost his money and his pride, and in his mind, he had nothing left to lose. He knew he couldn't beat Jinwoo in a fair fight, so he decided to play dirty. While Jinwoo was out picking up dinner, a group of men in a black van blocked Yoona's path as she walked home from the restaurant. Before she could scream, a cloth was pressed over her face, and the world went dark. When Yoona woke up, she was sitting in a cold wooden chair. Her hands were tied behind her back. She was in a safe house, a dusty, abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city. The windows were covered with metal bars, and the only light came from a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. Minjun walked out of the shadows, looking messy and wild. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and his eyes were bloodshot. He looked like a man who had completely snapped. Where is your king now, Yoona? He laughed, his voice sounding high and shaky. I have guards everywhere. I have cameras on every street. Your husband is just a man. He can't find you here. Yoona looked at Minjun. Even though she was tied up, she didn't feel the terror he wanted her to feel. She remembered the dragon on Jinwoo's back. She remembered how the strongest men in the city bowed to him. You don't understand, Minjun, Yoona said, her voice steady. You think you've hidden me in a safe place. But all you've done is give him a reason to stop pretending. You haven't trapped me. You've trapped yourself. Minjun slapped the table next to her. Shut up. He's a driver. I've sent 50 men to finish him off. By now, your husband is nothing but a memory. Suddenly, Minjun's radio buzzed. A voice on the other end sounded terrified. Sir. Something is wrong. The gate guards are gone. We didn't hear a shot. We didn't see anyone. They just vanished. Minjun grabbed the radio. Check the cameras. Use the thermal sensors. The cameras are black, sir, the voice screamed. It's like the shadows are moving. Wait, I see him. He's just walking through the front door. He doesn't have a gun. He's just looking at his watch. A loud boom echoed through the warehouse as the heavy steel front doors were ripped off their hinges. The sound wasn't made by a bomb. It was the sound of a man who had run out of patience. The lights in the warehouse began to flicker and pop, one by one, plunging the room into darkness. Minjun pulled out a small pistol, his hands shaking so hard he almost dropped it. "Stay back. I'll shoot her. I swear." In the back of the room, a pair of eyes seemed to glow in the dark. Jinwoo walked into the circle of light under the single bulb. He wasn't wearing his simple jacket anymore. He wore a long black coat, and his face was as hard as stone. He didn't look like a husband. He looked like a nightmare. "You had a peaceful life, Minjun," Jinwoo said, his voice a low growl that made the walls vibrate. "You could have lived. But you touched the only thing in this world that makes me want to be human." Jinwoo took a step forward, and the ground seemed to shake. The secure safehouse felt like a cage, and the lock was broken. Jinwoo stood in the middle of the dark warehouse, but he was no longer the quiet driver Yoona knew. The air around him felt cold and sharp. He didn't look at the trembling men around him. He only looked at his phone. With one steady thumb, he sent a single signal to a private network that had been silent for 3 years. The signal was a picture of a black dragon. Across the city, the world stopped. In expensive high-rise offices, powerful men dropped their gold pens. In hidden underground clubs, tough bikers stood up and turned off the music. On every street corner, every taxi driver and every delivery worker stopped what they were doing. The message was clear: the king has returned, and he is angry. "You have 20 minutes, Jinwoo's voice boomed through the warehouse, though he wasn't speaking to Minjun. He was speaking to the thousands of eyes and ears that now answered his call. "Find every person who helped with this. Lock down the docks. Close the bridges. No one leaves this city until my wife is safe." Minjun tried to laugh, but it sounded like a sob. "You're crazy. You're just one man." "I am the man who built this city," Jinwoo said, walking slowly toward him. "Every brick you walk on, every dollar you spend, it all exists because I allowed it. You mistook my kindness for weakness. You thought because I stopped killing, I forgot how to do it." Outside, the sound of hundreds of engines filled the air. Helicopters circled above, their searchlights cutting through the dark like giant eyes. Black cars began to surround the warehouse, hundreds of them, stretching as far as the eye could see. Men in black suits stepped out, their faces hard and loyal. They didn't look at the police or the news cameras. They only looked toward the door where their chairman stood. Inside, Minjun's phone began to ring. Then his laptop began to beep. One by one, his bank accounts were being emptied. His companies were being sold for a penny. His reputation was being erased from the internet. In less than 10 minutes, the billionaire had become a ghost. "Sir," a voice came over the warehouse speakers. It was the head of the city's largest security firm. "The perimeter is secure. Every exit is blocked. We have found the men who took her. They are waiting for your judgment." Jinwoo looked at Yoona. His eyes softened for a brief second, showing a flicker of the husband she loved, before turning back to ice as he looked at Minjun. He reached out and untied her ropes with one hand, while the other stayed curled into a fist. "The nobody is gone, Minjun," Jinwoo whispered. "And now, you are going to learn why everyone else stayed quiet." The city was silent, held in the grip of the Black Dragon. The lockdown was complete. The Nobody Act was over, and for the first time in 3 years, the tiger was fully awake. The warehouse was silent and cold as Jinwoo stepped over the broken steel door. Outside, the world was on fire with searchlights and sirens, but inside, the air was as still as a grave. Minjun backed away, tripping over a wooden crate. He held his small gun with both hands, but his arms were shaking so much that the weapon pointed at the floor. "Stop!" Minjun screamed, his voice cracking like thin glass. "I have millions of dollars. I can give you anything. Just name a price and go back to being a nobody." Jinwoo didn't stop. He walked with slow, heavy steps, his black coat flowing behind him like smoke. He didn't look at the gun. He didn't look at the expensive watch on Minjun's wrist. He only looked at the fear in the billionaire's eyes. "You still think this is about money?" Jinwoo said. His voice was a low, terrifying whisper that seemed to come from the shadows themselves. "You think you can buy safety because you've spent your whole life buying people. But you can't buy the wind, Minjun. And you can't buy your way out of a storm." Minjun reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, desperately trying to call his lawyers, his bankers, anyone who could save him. But the screen was black. "My accounts, they're gone. My lawyers aren't answering." "What did you do?" "I turned off your world," Jinwoo replied. He stood just a few feet away now, a giant of a man who blocked out the light. "In this room, your money is just paper. Your name is just noise. Here, there are no billionaires. There is only a man who hurt my wife, and the man who is going to make sure you never do it again." Minjun finally snapped. He tried to pull the trigger, but Jinwoo moved faster than the eye could see. In one smooth motion, Jinwoo's hand clamped onto the gun, his fingers crushing the metal as if it were made of plastic. He twisted the weapon out of Minjun's hand and dropped it. It hit the concrete with a dull thud, useless and broken. Minjun fell to his knees, sobbing. He looked at the shadows surrounding him and realized the truth. The guards he hired were gone. The walls he built were useless. He had spent his life believing he was the sun, but he was standing in the presence of the night. Jinwoo ignored the broken man on the floor. He turned to Yoona, who was watching him with wide, wondering eyes. He reached down and gently helped her stand up. He brushed a stray hair from her face, his touch suddenly soft and full of love. "Is it over?" Yoona whispered, her voice trembling. "It's over," Jinwoo promised. He looked back at Minjun one last time, his eyes as cold as a winter moon. "The fortress has fallen. There is nowhere left for him to hide." As Jinwoo led Yoona toward the exit, the black cars outside turned their lights on all at once, blinding the billionaire where he sat in the dirt. The nobody had won, not with a checkbook, but with the power of the shadows he owned. The sun rose over the city the next morning, but the world felt completely different. For Minjun, the nightmare was just beginning. By the time the newspapers were printed, he was no longer a billionaire. His luxury cars were towed away, his high-rise office was locked by the bank, and his name was scrubbed from every board of directors in the country. He sat on a cold bench in a public park, wearing a rumpled suit that now felt like a costume. He had discovered too late that money was like sand. It slipped through your fingers the moment a real storm arrived. Back at their small house, the air was quiet. Jinwoo was in the kitchen, carefully pouring hot tea into two simple ceramic mugs. He looked exactly like the man Yoona had married 3 years ago, but the secret between them was now out in the light. He wasn't just a driver, and they weren't just an ordinary couple. Yoona sat at the small wooden table, watching him. She looked at his hands. The same hands that had crushed a metal gun the night before were now gently holding a teapot. "You didn't go to work today," she said softly. Jinwoo sat down across from her and pushed a mug toward her. "The restaurant is being cleaned and repaired. You're the owner now, remember? You can take a day off." Yoona smiled, but her eyes were serious. "Jinwoo, we can't go back to how things were. I know about the dragon. I know about the chairman. I know that you own the shadows of this city. How can we pretend to be a nobody family after everything that happened?" Jinwoo reached across the table and took her hand. His skin was warm, and his grip was protective. "We don't have to pretend anymore, Yoona. I spent 3 years trying to hide the monster inside me because I wanted to be worthy of your kindness. I thought that to love you, I had to be a different person." He looked out the window at the garden they had planted together. "But last night, I realized that the nobody driver and the black dragon are both me. One provides the life we love, and the other protects it. I don't want to choose anymore. I just want to be the man who stands by your side." Yoona squeezed his hand. She realized that she wasn't afraid of the dragon on his back. She was grateful for it. The power he held wasn't a threat to their happiness. It was the wall that kept the world from breaking it. They weren't an ordinary couple, but they were a team. "So, what happens now?" she asked. "Now," Jinwoo said, a small, playful glint returning to his eyes. "We go to the restaurant. The staff is waiting for their new boss to give them orders. And after that, maybe we'll take the long way home. I know a very good driver who can take us wherever we want to go." Yoona laughed, the sound bright and full of hope. The billionaire was ruined, the secrets were gone, and the truth had set them free. They walked out of their house together, stepping into a world that finally knew exactly who they were. They weren't nobodies. They were together, and that was the only power that truly mattered.